السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. داوديال كسر وانا دالمر تي في مانتي وحا مرتينا دكتور مارك وايت او كفا لندن دور وحيالات وكسبسن كورونا فيروس. داوشو عنو حيصله. Dr. Mark White is the CEO of Gateway Health and Wellness. Dr. Mark White, welcome to Dalmar TV.
Good evening. Good evening. It's good to be here.
It seems things are not getting better, and I heard there's a lot of different ways this virus is spreading. Can you speak about the different ways that COVID-19 is spreading?
Yes, that's a really good question, and things do seem to be turbulent, if you will. Initially we were told, and most people have the notion that the virus is spread two ways. One is direct contact. If you're standing close to another person and they cough and droplets get on your eyes, nose, or mouth, that you can get directly get the particles from their saliva on you. The other way is contact. Let's say they cough really hard and then they touch a table or a doorknob, and then the particles, and you come along and you touch the same doorknob or the table. And then, so of course the virus can be spread that way. But there's a lot of evidence now that supports airborne transmission. In other words, that the virus, after a person coughs or sneezes, that the particles are suspended in air. And there's been a lot of study and research done behind this, that these particles that come from our mouth when we cough hard are suspended in air and can be there for a significant amount of time.
If I may, what you just said, and daawadayaal dhakhtarku wuxuu yiri cudurka waxaan su-aasha weydiiyey cudurkan waxyaalo weli xaaladdu isan bedelin, cudurkiina uu sii kala faafiyaa, bahalkan uu faafiyaa. Wuxuu yiri hadal kusoo gabagabeeyey bahalkan waxaa la ogaaday baaritaan la sameeyey in uu markuu qofku qufacaas aan dabeyshaas cabaar meeshu qufacay cabaar ay joogayso oo baaritaankaasu ama dhawaan la ogaaday. Marka airborne waxaa weeye yani qufacaya airkii marka hawada cabaar ku jiraya. My second question, Dr. White, is that the 6 feet distance, who measured it, who came out with it, scientifically, how did that came out?
Yeah, that's a good question also, because a lot of people have, I think we just took it for granted. We heard about the 6 feet and everybody's been on to the, even though I don't think people like measure, I'm going to be 6 feet away. They have that in there. They kind of have that in their mind that, okay, I've been told 6 feet and I'm going to try to keep my distance. The particles that come out when we talk are very small particles, 1 micron. And so when you think about a micron, think about one hair follicle, one strand of hair has a diameter of about 8 microns. The viral or the particles that come out of our mouths when we're talking can be anywhere from 1 micron. Almost really hard to imagine something being that small. If one hair follicle is 8 microns, and one of these particles that spews from our mouth is 1 micron or less, we're talking about some very, very small particles that are spewed from our mouth. Now, some of these particles can measure about 5 microns, which is still very small. And so a person that is just talking at a regular voice, regular volume, they're going to have these particles coming out, and especially the ones that are about 5 microns, they'll come out and they'll drop about 6 feet away from the person. And so they've measured, they've done studies with radioactive tracers, and they found that the particles that are about 5 microns will drop to the floor about 6 feet away from a person who's talking in a regular tone and volume. And that's really where we get that by that 6 feet of distancing is going to keep you safe from the person that might be positive.
dawadayaal wuxuu yidhi particles oo bahal yar yar oo qofku markuu halkii particle yani halkii tinta yarta oo waxay leedahay 8 xabo oo 8 particles marka wuxuu yidhi haddii 8 yararka ay leedahay qofku markuu qufaco kale firirkaas ama kasoo uu gaariyo kale hadduu xataa sanka u xiran weli qofka kale uu ku ridi karaa sida isagu yeelay hadeero kale marka qofku caadi markuu hadlayo kale ilaa firirkaas wuxuu gaari karaa ilaa 6 feet marka su'aashan weydiiyey waxay ahayd siyaa lagu keenay fikraddan 6 feet oo kale 6 feet oo kale yaas cabiray scientifically science ahaan oo kale marka wuxuu yidhi qofka hadduu caadi u hadlayo ilaa firirkaas wuxuu gaari karaa ilaa 6 feet marka sidaasaa lagu alifay lagu keenay marka Dr. White, how do these particles go? What do we need to take into consideration?
Right. So when we think about these particles, so that's when we think about the 6 feet, we're talking about a person who's talking, not shouting or heavy breathing or coughing, because that same particle will not just go 6 feet, but it can go 12 feet. Same particle. Studies been done and shows that a particle that is 5 microns with heavy breathing, laughing, talking loud, those particles will travel by 12 feet instead of the 6 feet. So we got to be mindful if we're around people, especially if we're around someone who does not have a mask on, who's talking loud, or heavy breathing, or laughing, the particles that are coming out of their mouth that we cannot see because they're so small can travel up to 12 feet. And so again, if the person's COVID positive and they're talking or laughing, those particles are going to go further than 6 feet. They're going to go 12 feet. And so we want to be mindful of how what really can happen in a person that is positive, that's coughing or laughing or heavy breathing. Very important to understand that.
Micronisku waxa weeye waxa la yiraahdaa nafaqeeyaalka yararka saint marka hadii Soomaali loo qeexo marka waxa su'aashan weydiiyay waxa weeye ilaa sidee bay maxaa laga fikri karaa ilaa meeqa gaaraan hadii qofku qufaco kale ama ma hadii waxaan sidee loogu talagalay qofku loo taxadirayo kale marka wuxuu yiri waxa weeye ilaa waqti meel dheer bay gaaraan. How far can the particles go without the mask?
So here's where it gets really tricky. When a person, let's say, there was a study done by JAMA, which is a reputable journal, medical journal, and they did a study where they showed that if a person coughs, that there is like a cloud of moisture that can travel out of the person's mouth into the air, and that cloud of moisture that can travel up to 23, 27 feet. So if somebody coughs really hard, there's this cloud of moisture that has particles in it that are 5 microns, less than 5 microns, and it can travel, and it can go 23 to 27 feet, so much further than the 6 feet distancing. And what happens is when this cloud of moisture, which has the viral particles wrapped around the saliva, and this kind of cloud, which we can't see, as the cloud, or as the particles, these droplet nuclei, they're called aerosols, as they start to evaporate, the moisture that's around them, as it starts to evaporate, the virus is left out. You have the virus. Once the saliva is evaporated from this droplet nuclei, you have the virus. And the virus remains suspended in the air. And both the New England Journal of Medicine, they had a correspondence, and they did a study, and they showed that these viral particles that are suspended in the air can remain viable for 3 hours. Also, the NIH did a very similar study where they also showed that these viral particles remain viable up to 3 hours. Now, what the study didn't tell or didn't show, and this is where more research is being done at, is exactly how much of a viral load or how much virus do you have to take in. Let's say if you're in a room where there's people that are positive for COVID-19 and they're coughing and sneezing, and we know now that that puff of moisture that can travel up to 23, 27 feet, once it dries up, you have these viruses that are airborne and can remain airborne, suspended in air for up to 3 hours. We just don't know how much virus that you would have to take in order to be considered COVID positive. So I think that with that information, we have to really, we have to assume that everyone has the virus. If you assume that everyone has the virus and you ask, people that you're around to put the mask on, then you will eliminate that spread, that so easily spread airborne virus to be emitted into the air. So it's really, really, really important that we continue. I'm going to continue to say that we wear the mask, because it cuts down on these particles traveling and these viruses getting suspended in air, and perhaps another route of spread for the virus.
su-aashaan weydiiyey waxaa weeye qofka hadduu qufaco isagoon maask qabin ilaa meeqaa qufacaasuu gaari karaa. marka wuxuu yidhi baaritaan ay sameeyeen Journal of American Medical Association oo loo gaabiyey jaamac, qufacaas ama neefta qofkaas waxaa laga yaabaa inay gaarto 23 ilaa 27 feet inay gaarto, ayna hawada ku jiri karto ilaa iyo 3 saac. Doctor, I have a follow-up question. Does it matter what type of mask the individual is wearing?
Well, it does. Again, there was a study done, and they looked at a person that just coughed, and a hard cough, those particles can travel up to 12 feet. Okay. With a mask on, the bandana kind of made out of t-shirt material, bandana wrapped around the mouth and the nose, that will cut the distance down to about 3 feet. The cotton handkerchief masks that people use, you see, they will cut the distance that it travels down to about 1 foot 3 inches. The cone type mask that you buy at CVS or Walmart, they will cut it down to about 8 inches. Also, the medical mask, the blue mask that you see people wearing, cuts it down to 8 inches. It's interesting that the quilted material that's stitched together, that mask will cut the the distance down when a person, if they cough and they're COVID positive, cuts it down to 2.5 inches. 2.5 inches. So it's really, really important. So when you ask the question, do the masks work? Does it help in cutting down the spread of this virus? Absolutely, it does. It absolutely does cut it down.
su-aashaan weydiiyaa waxay ahayd haddii qofku uu qabo maaska oo kale maaska dhowr maaska arkaysaa kala bedelan miyay kala roon yihiin way kala roon yihiin siduu sheegay qaarba waa si laakiin ugu dambeyntii wuxuu kusoo gabagabeeyey in ay muhiim tahay in maaska la xirto oo saas weeye. Dr. White, my final question for the interview is that if a person who has a corona is coughing and he's not wearing a mask, and there's an individual who's wearing a mask nearby, can that person who's wearing a mask by the way, if the person who's wearing the mask is healthy, can that person be affected or catch the COVID?
Right. Good question. And I think that it's something that we all need to take into consideration, because if I have a mask on and let's say that you and I are talking and you're COVID positive, but you don't have any symptoms, because we know that there's a significant number of people out there that are asymptomatic. They don't have any symptoms, but they're COVID positive. If you cough, you don't have a mask on. I have a mask on. If you cough, those particles will get through my mask. So the mask really doesn't prevent the particles from going through the mask. The only mask that is really protective against the particles that are coming out of one's mouth that's COVID positive would be a real quote unquote N95 mask. There's a lot of masks out there that have N95 on them, and they're not the legitimate real N95 mask. Those masks are, the particle size would have to be smaller than 0.03 microns. But that's just really, really, really small. So if you have an N95 mask, a real N95 mask on, it would be fitted for your face, then it would be very difficult for the virus to get through that mask. But all the other masks that you see people wearing, if the person that is positive doesn't have a mask on, and you have any of those other masks other than the N95 that's used in the hospital, the virus is going to come through your mask. And that's why it's really important that we keep stressing to one another, put your mask on, put your mask on, because believe me, there's a lot of people out there that are positive and they don't even know they're positive. They don't have any symptoms. And so let's just assume that everyone has, everyone's positive and everyone wear a mask, and let's cut down the spread of this virus. And I think that we'll make it, it'll be better. We'll be better.
su-aashii aan weydiiyey Dr. White waxaa weeye haddii qof uu qabo cudurka uu qufaco oo laakiin qof kaloo cudurka aan qabin oo maaska xiran, qofkaas ma saamayn kartaa? wuxuu kusoo gabagabeeyey haa way saamayn kartaa, laakiin waxay ku xiran tahay maaska uu qabo. maaska kale maaskoo kale fiican yihiin soo asagu noo sheegay. maaska la yiraahdo N95 midka runta hadduu jiro oo la heli karo, kaas haddii la xirto waa suurtagal qofkaas inuu janiskiisu aad u fiican inuu ka badbaado. ugu dambeyntii wuxuu kusoo gabagabeeyey waa muhiim in maaska la xirto, haddii kale sariiraha ICU-ga loo badanaya. hala is ilaaliyo. Dr. Wright, as always, great information.
Yes, always glad to be with you and share the information.
waa tahay daawadayaal, caawi barnaamijkan intaasuu ku egyahay. asalaamu calaykum waraxmatullahi wabarakaatu.